Hi, everyone. Welcome to TOVA Tuesdays. Today, where we talk about all things to help everyone get to a path to a healthier lifestyle. And in order to do that, we want you to achieve optimal health and wellness. Today for TOVA Tuesday, I have a special guest for you, and it's Dr. Scott Jones. She's a clinical psychologist and associate professor, department chair of psychology at Delaware State University. And to add on, she is the assistant dean of the College of Health and Behavioral Sciences. I thought to talk about, all of the things that we're dealing with this pandemic. And last week I had Norwood Coleman, who is a social worker, who was also a licensed clinical social worker. But I wanted to share with you a perspective of psychologist and also ask her some advice and tips about adjusting to the new normal. So I want to introduce you to Dr. Scott Jones. Welcome to TOVA Tuesdays.
Well, thanks for having me, Dr. Anderson. I'm very pleased to speak with you. We are actually under a great deal of acculturation this season, as I like to put it, where we're all looking and participating in this new normal.
Yes, and today's topic is adjusting to the new normal, as I should say. But I wanted to talk to you about your background. I know you're a Delaware State alumni, and
Yes.
You graduated with an undergraduate degree in social worker and then went on to become a clinical psychologist. But tell me how you evolved to where you are today.
Okay. I went to Delaware State. I acquired and received a BS in psychology at the very same department where I am the chair now. So that's a plus for Delaware State University. I also received a MSW from Delaware State University as well. Subsequent to that, I went on to Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, where I acquired an MS in clinical psychology and a doctorate in clinical psychology. I always had aspirations to be a psychologist. I always liked to actually work with people, study the mind. I was very fascinated by human behavior, as well as looking into the mental processes of individuals. I decided that I wanted to be a psychologist in the 11th grade.
Wow. So tell me about some of the positions you had and how you've helped others.
My subspecialties, I'm a clinical psychologist with 3 subspecialties. I have a subspecialty in forensic psychology. I'm also have a subspecialty in substance-related disorders, substance abuse counseling, as well as sports psychology. However, I worked in this prison system, for an extensive period of time prior to coming to academia, as well as I also worked as a psychiatric social worker for years with the state of Delaware for health and social services with crisis intervention services.
Wow. Sounds like you have had a lot of experience in working and serving the community in various capacities. But I wanted to talk to you also about how common mental illness is, and also share with you the perspective of trying to get especially the African American community, access to therapeutic services if they're suffering from a mental illness. And I was really astounded in some of the statistics that I found out that mental illness is actually among the most common health conditions in the United States. And approximately 1 in 5 adults in the US, and that's 43.8 million people, or 18.5% of the population, will experience a mental illness in a given year. That's astounding statistics. What do you make of that?
Yep, you're right on with the statistics. It's astounding that there is approximately 43 to 47 million American people walking around with a mental illness. Now, part of that number is that some individuals are treated and others are not.
Right.
You have a mental illness where we're all subject to, at some point in time, becoming mentally ill, meaning that we could have state conditions of depression and or anxiety at any given time. And then you have individuals who actually suffer from a mental disorder. However, pertaining to your question about African Americans, a lot of time African Americans may not have possibly, there was a lot of stigma. And I always say that there was stigma as a result of not wanting to go seek out counseling and talk to people when they were under a great deal of distress. African Americans typically would utilize spirituality and religion. However, conventional therapies, although we were trained with the conventional therapies, what I have found out now through studying Black psychology, or an African-centered healing approach to psychology, which has been around for approximately about 50 years. We can credit an African-American psychologist by the name of Joseph White for coming up with Black psychology. Is it gives us a different perspective of figuring out how to work with Blacks and other minorities, pertaining to looking at ways to heal them, looking at aspects that have oppressed them for some time, which could be somewhat different than the conventional therapies that we've actually participated in, such as providing empathy and nurturance, but really looking to heal the individual. I often say sometimes, and I'm African American myself, is that there's a phenomenon that's called the post-traumatic slavery disorder that has impacted African Americans through generations. It's almost like a mindset, and also with racism compacting that has taken a psychological toll on many African Americans that have just affected us and individuals in all contexts, such as even their socioeconomical status, or even looking at the individual's differences that they may have with their sexual preference and their well-being, and how they even feel and think about themselves, and how they can have a different worldview, or a worldview to feel accepted, self-acceptance and self-esteem. So, you know, this new wave of beginning to look at the African-centered healing approach, also known as the Black psychology, is extremely phenomenal, because it allows us to work with the individual, so that the individual can begin to look at some of the aspects that keep them from being all that they possibly can be.
Thank you for expounding on that. And I also want to say that in my experience working with African American community, that sometimes patients or clients will say, I'm going to pray my depression away, and they will not take the next step to seek counseling when they do have a mental illness. Can you talk about that? Though we recognize that prayer is important, how do you get clients to go to the next step to get therapeutic help and support that they need?
One thing we have to do is also respect the client and their religion or their spirituality by recognizing. And also, one thing about working with clients is, you know, even though the therapist may be someone in control, I always say that learning is reciprocity, it's give and take. So if you don't know about a person's religion or spirituality, that is an opportunity to learn. I will tell you that traditional African healing has been in existence for many centuries, okay? And a lot of researchers, we're not sure where it stems from and how it actually relates to improving a person's sense of well-being. But if you really think about it, a person has a sense of belonging to something, and in that sense of belonging and being able to pray and holding on to something, it allows them to have some type of intrinsic healing approach that will help them and help their well-being. You know, I often tell the students that we have 6 senses, okay? And the 6th one is our intuition, our spirituality that we have. And when sometimes people speak to us or move us, sometimes they don't necessarily move us by their ability to speak to us or communicate with us, process. Sometimes you can feel someone's spiritual, okay? And oftentimes we necessarily don't understand that because that's not something that's always taught, but that taps into that healing approach. That goes back to looking at the African traditional healing approaches from in the past. Whether the individuals had worshipped a god or a spirit, even with the Indians, the Native American Indians, they had a sense of holding on to something that improved their overall well-being.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. So when you talk about African-centric healing, explain a little bit about what makes that different than traditional clinical approaches in your field of psychology
Okay.
to heal or to enlighten a client about their mental illness and get them on a path to a better well-being.
Okay. Now, when I was in my training, I was taught a Eurocentric, typically approach. What I now know from reading the literature and studying about African, and also being African American myself, was that some of what I taught, it has a lot of value, but it necessarily did not reach your Black communities, sometimes your Asian or other minority communities, by addressing what they may experience, by actually starting where they're at and understanding their differences before we're embarking upon trying to necessarily understand the problem. Typically in contemporary psychotherapies, if you have a borderline personality disorder, for example, you may tend to want to use dialectical behavioral therapy for that. Now, that's a prescription for that particular disorder. However, if you're working with individuals from a healing perspective, you begin to take an idiographic approach by working with that individual to begin to start to looking at ways that person can heal, which had to help alleviate some of those maladaptive symptoms that they are expressing or having. In understanding also that one prescription of a therapeutic approach is not always good for everybody. Mm-hmm. But also, I'm going to borrow from social work as well, kind of starting where the person is at to begin to work with them to start the healing process, but also not forgetting about the things that could oppress them or keep them from becoming healed within themselves intrinsically.
Mm-hmm. And my background is in nursing, and I, was trained, in medicine. I would say Western medicine. But I learned a lot about African-centric healing from my grandma, who's a Black Seminole Indian, was a very spiritual person, I must say. What I wanted to ask you, do you see psychologists and physicians ever putting mental health on the same paradigm as treating someone's physical health?
Well, I think that I also do part-time work in an ER. Okay? And although I think oftentimes, and still in our culture, we begin to treat the physical conditions and often don't think about sometimes the psychological ramifications. We even mention those as oftentimes secondary, not thinking that a lot of times the person's mental, if it debilitates, that it also has an impact on the individual's immune system, especially when we're looking at holistic care. I would like to see the playing ground kind of leveled, where your behavioral practitioners were much more visible, and our colleagues, the physicians or the nurse practitioners, would call on us a little bit more to assist them in providing holistic care. I just think that we have a ways to go. Once we can get past our egos, and stop thinking one discipline is better than the other discipline, then we can begin to start to treat the holistic illness in the person.
So tell me also some of the challenges you see and working with the African American community that you were able to overcome as far as helping them get on a path to a better health and wellness and a better mental state of mind? Like, how would you work with a client to maybe be a little skeptical because they consider you a shrink, or you're trying to get in my head? I don't have a problem. I can't even sometimes get my clients to want to fill out a depression screen because they say, well, what are you trying to tell me? Are you trying to say I'm crazy, or, what's going on? So how do we begin to open that dialogue so that their mental health is just as important as their physical? How do you overcome that?
Dr. Anderson, I often would have conversations with them as well to let them know that their mental health is just as equally important as their physical health. I also begin to explain brain function. I begin to start to educate them about their brain. Okay, I begin to start to talk about their neurotransmitters and educate them about the neurotransmitters and sometimes what the neurotransmitters are responsible for. It's an opportunity then so that they can begin to take what they see as their anatomy and associate that as well with also receiving proper treatment and sometimes psychopharmacotherapy if needed. I run into the problem that a lot of times patients do not want to receive the psychopharmacotherapy because they feel as though, okay, I don't have a problem. I'm not going to take this medication because I don't have a problem to assist me with my depression. I also let them know, and I talk about the brain. I used to carry around pictures sometimes of the brain to show them what part could be actually affected by talking about maybe serotonin, that we all have these chemicals, but sometimes, we might not have enough that's being secreted that can cause us to feel this way. I have been well received by making that connection with brain functionality and also treating mental illness. It has worked. I think instead of me just going in telling people that, okay, here's your symptomology, and this is what I believe is taking place with you, the individual have an opportunity to make a connection. It's more so like how medical doctors or nurse practitioners would begin to describe a person with having hypertension. That resonates with them because they actually can see it. It makes sense to them. So I begin to start to use some practical knowledge in trying to make a connection between our brain functionality as well as a mental disorder.
Wow.
And or mental illness.
Wow. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
I also want to segue into one of the things that I have challenges with, even myself on the front line, is that during this COVID-19 pandemic, one of the things you shared in the meeting, you said, faculty, we have to adjust to the new normal, right? And so every day I get statistics. I look at the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center. And even today, I looked again, and, there are 3 million confirmed cases of coronavirus, 5.6 million people tested worldwide, 215,000 deaths in the United States. And then I read Delaware Online before I go to work, and then we get more statistics. Close to 4,000 confirmed cases here in Delaware, 125 deaths. Right. So as a healthcare provider and working with my clients, how do we look into this data, or sort of like we're just overdriven by data, and data can cause anxiety? And how can you help clients deal with this new normal and the being constantly bombarded with statistics and the fear of the unknown?
Well, one of the things I even have to tell myself is to cut off the television. I'm even sometimes overwhelmed by looking at the data, the statistics as they grow. Overnight, Delaware has went from like 3,000 to 4,167 cases, where Sussex County currently now have the most cases.
Yeah.
You begin to start to see this kind of data. And one thing I do know by being a scholar practitioner is that data can be underreported or overreported. And sometimes we necessarily don't know all about the data. And there's a lot of questions that you could have by just reading data without the summary or report or the raw data. So, when you begin to educate people and talk to people, one of the things I let people know that they cannot get so caught up in the data because you don't know all the meaning behind the data. You don't know where they're getting the data from necessarily. This is someone else reporting it. You don't know how many subjects actually reported. And the other thing is we necessarily don't hear about how many individuals are actually returning to home and going back to some normalcy with their life subsequent to going to the emergency department or even having a brief hospital stay. So a lot of times people will have a great deal of anxiety because the news that they're reading or hearing about typically is maladaptive. Okay, there's a lot of heightened awareness around the news. The news is also really good. It's good for us to stay tuned in, but at some point in time, we're going to have to also draw the line so that we can take care of ourselves. It's important that we take care of ourselves because what may stress me out may not stress you out. And if you're becoming taxed or overwhelmed by looking at all of the increased cases of COVID-19, then you may need to not watch the news as much. We are in a situation where this is also life-changing for everybody. But one good thing we can find, we are now able to spend a little bit more time with our families. We're able to actually slow down. In the United States, we move extremely fast. People work oftentimes more than one job. We oftentimes don't have time to sit down and eat at the dinner table or actually sometimes even call the people that we love because we're moving extremely fast. We socialize a lot. This has allowed us to take time to begin to start to look at some of the things we may need to change about ourselves, to embrace some of the things that were actually viewed upon as being negative as things that can help us adjust to and create a good workplace balance for ourselves. Me working at the university and also working after hours, I have recognized now that I will be using virtual meetings more. It's much more comfortable and cozy, and it saves time. Okay, and you're still socializing with people. It's one way that we can cut out on the hustle and bustle to try to also take care of ourselves. But I just want to add something else, Dr. Anderson, that educators, healthcare providers, and anyone providing services, these individuals have to figure out ways to also take care of themselves. We're providing services to other people, but it's also important that we take care of ourselves. You may have to tell people no, it's some things that you're not going to be capable of.
I appreciate you squeezing time in for me today.
Yeah, we have to make sure that we begin to start to be a little selfish with our time, okay, and take care of ourselves. But once again, stress is what kills. And we can't help anyone else until we begin to start to really help ourselves and nurture ourselves as well. But in the United States, we hustle and bustle so much that if a patient would tell me that they receive 4 to 6 hours of sleep on an average night, I would consider that normal. Typically, a lot of times your textbooks tell you that it's 6 to 8 hours, or it could be a little more. But that was typically what we would say would be textbook and not the reality for most people. But it's my hope that people are adequately getting the sleep that they need.
Yes, and that's another TOVA Tuesday tip that I wanted to share with you and ask your opinion on it. But I wanted to step away a second, and I happened to also look at a news article I read, and also want to give tribute to my great student that I had, Asia Brown, who
Yes.
did a project about the suicide. And I didn't know this, and we found this out as we were working on her project, is that suicide is the second leading cause of death among people ages 15 to 34 years of age in the US. But what I want to say to you was that this really hit me because I'm on the front line as a healthcare provider, providing care, screening patients for coronavirus, sort of being uncertain whether or not I have, been infected with it, and then what do I do, and making sure that I get plenty of sleep as well, and take care of my personal responsibilities and all of that. But Dr. Larna Breen was an ER doctor that recently committed suicide. And it seemed like over the last couple of days, she seemed detached from her family. But I also wanted to mention in the article, it said that, the onslaught of suffering and death that healthcare providers on the front lines see, pose them to become at risk for mental health disorders and probably PTSD, as similar to those who are on the front line in the military. And do you think that her death may sort of bring attention to the fact that as healthcare providers, we really need to pay attention to our mental health state, and that more services and from employers need to be provided for us?
Yeah, I think that employers have to really begin to take a look at how the work complexities that the employees actually are participating in. And more specifically, when you make reference to the emergency room physicians and the nurses there, I work with them. And actually, I was just there Sunday at the hospital that I work in, and I checked in with them. And one doctor did tell me that he was somewhat overwhelmed. It seemed like it was getting a little better. He said, but initially it's very overwhelming when you also have to think about if you're going to get infected because you come in contact with someone. That's the stress that they have. I believe that we oftentimes, we're taking a look at how we can provide services to other people, okay, whether it's patients or students or whoever. But we also have to take in account those individuals who are providing those first line services. They need help and relaxation as well. If you're able to condense their time and give them an extra day off or lighten their load, take a look at their work complexities and to show them that you appreciate all that they're doing, and also that you also respect their time, because these are the same individuals that have families like their patients. Okay? And it's extremely important that employers begin to also think about the health and wellness of their employees, also while they're providing services.
Right. And my condolences go up to this doctor. But I see this all the time, is that, we're so busy taking care of everyone else that we don't take time to take care of ourselves. And
it's called compassionate fatigue, okay, also known as burnout.
Right.
Where you begin to start to provide services. And every good doctor or nurse, you want to be the best that you possibly can be. You do not want to fail the patient, let alone the patient's family. That's something heavy to have to deal with if you have a patient that you're trying to provide services to, clinical services to, and that person expires, or that person dies. That's something heavy on the individual. That person may feel as though they didn't do something appropriate enough. And then to compound that on with other cases that may be far-reaching cases that are out of their control will have a psychological impact on them. I also think that employers need to create hotlines for their employees so that they can call and vent, crisis hotlines, anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
so that they won't have any pressure. Ventilation and sustainment is very therapeutic, where oftentimes people just need to get it out
Mm-hmm.
while someone listens,
Mm-hmm.
and not necessarily have to give constructive feedback, but they want someone to listen to them. It's
Mm.
very important.
Wow, these are all great tips and recommendations that you have provided to our audience here. But I wanted to get your perspective of some of the tips that I have shared with my clients as
Mm-hmm.
well, and also to elaborate on them a little bit more, as you are a clinical psychologist and my training is in nursing. I also wanted to show you that I did try to get a picture of you.
Yeah, you had a great one.
And I didn't put your contact information in, but Dr. Scott Jones has been very busy these days and has a lot of responsibility at the
Yes.
university, and we really want her to stay healthy and well.
Yes.
But one of the things that I put in my office is this quote, is that a tree that can bend with the wind will likely survive a storm. And so some of the things that I found in the psychology literature were
Mm-hmm.
these, and then I wanted you to talk about them a little bit, was to focus on what you can control, set a routine, adjustment is a process, learn to collaborate, learn to work creatively, and as a holistic medicine practitioner, I put in here, get plenty of sleep, at least 7 to 8 hours a night. Can
Yeah.
you share with me about these, and if you had more or some of ones you would add or not?
Well, one of the things when you said focus on what is in your control, that's extremely important. Oftentimes, the human nature, typically we step outside of our domain. Typically, a lot of times people and begin to start to, I call it Superman or Superwoman without their proper capes, begin to want to help and do things that are actually out of their control. That creates a lot of stress. We need to do a lot of thinking about what we can control and what we cannot. That also speaks to the statement that you have: a tree that can bend with the wind will likely survive a storm. That's survival of the fittest. That's called adaptation. A person who has the ability to adapt, which also speaks to one's intelligence, will be the person that know how to focus and triage the things that they need to triage. We need to also, as you indicated, set a routine. When you set a routine, sometimes that routine can help the individual stay structured. They don't have to feel like they're losing grip because we're much more in our homes or we're working from our homes. But if you was a person that you got up at 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning, you keep that routine. You do something, start your exercising then, water your plants, vacuum your floor, and the time that you would commute to work, fill that time in with something constructive, meditate, do whatever you need to do until it's time for you to get on your laptop or your computer. And adjustments, you have to be flexible and not be so rigid in your thinking and your thought processes where you will get yourself into a cognitive funk, which is likely to cause you a great deal of stress. You have something down here that's also, I think, is extremely important, and that's learn to collaborate and work with others. But if you are a supervisor, or you may need to go to your supervisor, because there's a lot of power in making sure that we designate. Sometimes you may not be capable of doing something, and you may have to designate that particular task to someone else. Also, you have to be very authentic and transparent and letting individuals know what you can and cannot handle, instead of trying to take it all on and not willing to say no. It's a constructive way to tell your employer that, look, I'm a little taxed with this project. It's a little too much at this particular time. I'm stressed. The authenticity will actually make you look like a rock star. And a person should receive you for being honest and being authentic. And learn to be creative. Creativity is extremely important, like you're being right now. you're giving information out, and you're using the power of technology to also reach the vast majority of people so that you can give your health tips. And you never go wrong with plenty of sleep. If you notice that you're starting to have insomnia or hypersomnia, okay, or hyposomnia, it's important that you contact maybe your healthcare provider, or if you're receiving proper mental health treatment, contact your therapist to talk about that. There could be signs that you are getting stressed out and experiencing some mild forms of depression.
Thank you so much. And do you have any other tips that I did not provide on here that you would like to share with our audience?
Well, you want to eat healthy, okay?
Ah.
You don't want to have. You want to make sure that you're thinking about your weight and eating healthy, because it don't take long before the pounds pack on. And finding creative ways to kind of exercise. I'm typically not a yard person, but I've noticed lately that I've been actually working in my yard and looking at things that I've actually neglected. But it also gives me an opportunity to participate in some exercise.
Thank you so much for all of your recommendations and tips. Lastly, I want to go back to talk about a vision that you have for the university, which is the Delaware State University Behavioral Health Center of Excellence. And I would say that now we really can see the importance of having good behavioral health care providers out in the medical field, out in the communities, as well as I would assume that the number of cases of people who are going to have to be treated for PTSD and trauma from all of the experiences they have had, especially healthcare providers who are on the front line, who are taking care of these patients. But talk to me about this vision you have and where we are today.
Okay, I have a vision for, you call it the Behavioral Center of Excellence, which we have coined the term now, the Behavioral, Biomedical, and Allied Health Resource Center. I have a vision for that. We're going to start small at what is known as our Capitol Park Civic Center, and we're going to be offering kind of holistic services, meaning we're going to have your office in there, co-located with the Cancer Support of Delaware, as well as our nursing department and some of our neuropsychology research endeavors. And we also look to reach out collaboratively with other state agencies and nonprofits to provide community services. The students will be engaging in research, while also we are looking to find a way to provide some type of behavioral health care services to individuals in need, at least partnership with some of these practitioners as well, so that we can provide these particular services. And it also gives our students an opportunity to participate in practicum and internships in such a rural area. It's my hope that we can get that up and running this summer. We're in the process of working on the building now. So I'm really ecstatic about that. I think that that's one good way that Delaware State University can actually show that we're training many of our students to be scholar practitioners and or scholar researchers, and also utilizing the community and helping the community as well. There's a lot of good, and the students at Delaware State University are extremely bright students. And one of the things is that a lot of the students are highly capable of participating in research and clinical practice, as well as just being receiving and also providing some of the tutelage to the community members.
Well, I'm excited. I'm excited about this endeavor, and I definitely would support it at 100%, because we really need healthcare providers in many different areas and disciplines out on the front line serving our communities. And Delaware State has a history of really educating social workers, psychologists, and those who go on to become doctors and nurses, to go out and serve the community in various capacities. And I would say now we can definitely see that we really need trained healthcare providers in behavioral health. The need is there, and we just need others and partners to join us in this vision as well. And want to thank Dr. Allen for all that he has done to move Delaware State forward as well. So, wow, this time has just gone by so fast. I want to thank you for coming on TOVA Tuesdays. And I really think that our audience has a better path to a healthier lifestyle. And we hope that you achieve optimal health and wellness, even in these uncertain times. To learn more about our work that we do at TOVA Healthcare, go to our website at www.tovacommunityhealth.org. You can also call us at 302-429-5870. Please like us on Facebook and Instagram by hashtagging TOVA Community Health. Remember, your health matters. Be safe and well. Thank you, Dr. Scott Jones, for coming on today. And taking time out of your busy schedule. And I think I've learned a lot, and I think our audience has really learned a lot about the importance of a holistic perspective on health and wellness. And we really have to take care of our mental health just as much as we have to take care of our physical health.
Thank you. And thank you for all that you do, Dr. Anderson.
Thank you, Dr. Scott Jones. We'll be talking soon,
all right.
hopefully. All right, take care.
Yep.